In David Cameron's memoirs, he discusses, among other things, his grief over losing his son, Ivan, aged 6, to Ohtahara syndrome. On the weekend, The Guardian's editorial was gracious enough to admit that David Cameron would have felt pain over such an unconscionable tragedy, but the editorial said it was only privileged pain. It's very important to know that David Cameron is a different species to us, a privileged species not touched by our unprivileged frailties. There exists no common humanity between David Cameron and us, apparently. He experiences life in a wholly other register. These were the beliefs expressed in The Guardian over the weekend, and such views were not those of a fly-by-night freelancer. This was The Guardian's editorial, taken down a couple of hours later for falling far short of their editorial standards. But here's the thing, they only backpedaled because of the bad publicity. Enough people clearly thought this stuff in the first place in order to get it published. And that is worrying, because this seems to be the view. Cameron doesn't really know about pain because he is a distant relative of the Queen, he went to Eton, he went to Oxford. But if David Cameron is privileged, then his son Ivan must be privileged too, right? He was also related to the Queen. He was the son of a Tory party leader, no less. His dad would go on to rule the country. Surely Ivan Cameron was born into privilege, wouldn't you say? Sure, he would have 20 or 30 seizures a day, lasting for minutes or sometimes hours, his small frame racked with spasms and what looked like searing pain. But they were privileged seizures, privileged spasms. By the end of the day, his clothes would be drenched in sweat, but of course his clothing was designer label, his sweat royal, his agony and death a privileged agony and death. See, it doesn't work, does it? And a moment's thought with anything like a human perspective reveals that it doesn't work. The Guardian thought it was unveiling vile, inhuman, class-based hate. Of course, it was The Guardian itself that displayed those things in spades. And notice the assumption. Cameron is privileged, but Guardian readers are not? I mean, relative to who? What's the comparison that means the average Guardian reader is not themselves privileged? 80% of the human race lives on less than $10 a day. Are old Etonians the only privileged ones? What about Guardian editors? Are they not themselves privileged? Or are they, when not demeaning the pain of grieving parents, moonlighting as chimney sweeps in Victorian tenements just to make ends meet? Why this convenient division of humanity so that the bad guys are over there while us good guys are over here? In my newsfeed, The Guardian's editorial was side by side with another news item, the Comedy Wildlife Photography Awards. It's quite a comparison. These finalists give us short-lived relief from the serious business of demonizing our ideological enemies. When clicking on the comedy wildlife photographs, we're able to take a break from despising each other, and instead we chuckle at animals that look like people. But what a contrast this is. We look at a grizzly bear who can maul us to death. Have you seen The Revenant? But he happens to be striking a particularly anthropomorphic pose, and so we say, look, the huggy bear thinks it's people. So David Cameron is another species, the bear is our friend. Our political opponents are demonized, animals are humanized. What's going on? Well, with the discussion of Ivan Cameron, we have an opportunity to stop, take a breath, and recalibrate our conversations. Surely the death of a son can put us in touch with some kind of common humanity, can't it? Can we not find common cause with one another for one brief moment as we grieve for a lost son, as we confront our own mortality, as we all acknowledge that we are walking through a dark valley and death is bigger than us all? Will our common mortality help us to feel a common humanity? And Christians have an even deeper tool, the death of the Son. If God so entered into our dark valley that he died our kind of death, if even the very highest and most privileged volunteered to have his frame racked with spasms and searing pain, is that not the greatest leveler imaginable? Might that be the basis on which we address our political opponents, not as enemies, but as fellow travelers through the same dark valley, accompanied by a king who thought nothing of privilege, but who walks with all, left or right, rich or poor, Brexit or Remain? When tribalism threatens, Christ is our hope. It's the 17th of September, this is Speak Life, and you're watching the livecast.